Hi, quick disclaimer. I am not a doctor or a mental health professional or a psychiatrist. I often sound like I'm maybe one, but I'm not. Dr. Henderson, I am not. But in the next 2 episodes, I will be discussing stories which relate to the brain, to the workings of the brain, and emotion and mental health. So if you are an expert, great, get in touch. But also remember, I'm not. I'm just a guy telling some stories and trying to do it as responsibly as I can. Okay, on with the episode. Her eyes remained closed at all times. He wouldn't drink even a sip of water. It was like all life had gone. Let's just call it sleeping. I'm not here. I mean, I am here, but I'm not. It's time the government did something. It was as if all life had gone. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Thank you if you've been in touch over the last week or so. Lots of people enjoying the speed chat that I was having about playing podcasts at different speeds. Yeah, well, loads of people do. Again, this is one of these other classic fucking I go, nobody plays podcasts at different speeds, and then I'm proven wrong by everybody who goes, actually, yeah, I do. I listen to it at this and whatever. So, yeah, so great. So, yeah, apparently lots of people listen to podcasts at very different speeds. Now, if you stick around at the very end of this episode, there might be a little bonus speed fun. Now, with this episode, right, I don't really know where to start. Well, I do, right? Well, I'm lying. I do know where to start, and I suppose where to start is where I started with it. I started with a word. A very simple word. Disassociation. Now, when I started to sort of process that, two very different stories presented themselves, and I sort of knew in a way that they lived in the same world of disassociation, but I still didn't really know what that was. I knew I was right. I knew I was into something, onto like some kind of idea. So the two stories that I have, one is a very strange phenomenon that happened in Sweden, and the other is a crime story. And I thought, maybe, possibly, do they live in the same world? Do they exist under the same banner? I think maybe the best thing to do is just to tell you the stories. And together, let's just see if we think that these hang together in the same world, or they live in the same sort of place. Are you ready? Okay. Let's go. This all began when I read an article one day about a young girl living in Sweden, and I was fascinated by it. Now, while we're on the subject of Sweden, shout out to the 2,134 listeners in Sweden. Hello. I don't know how you say hello in Swedish. Let me check. Hang on.
Hey.
Is that it? Hey. I say that at the start of every podcast. I thought it was going to be more more interesting than that. But hello, Sweden. So, okay. This girl's story that I became interested in. So, her name is Sophie. And Sophie is 9 years old. Now, she was born in Russia. She was born a healthy, young baby. And, as she grew into a toddler, she showed no signs of any ill health. She was a really active child. She would run around. She would play like any other child would. Sophie, one of her favourite things to do was to love to dance. She would play music and she would dance all day long if she could. I get you, Sophie. I get that. Her language skills are good. Her overall health was good. But at 9 years old, living in Sweden, Sophie lies in a bed where she has lay for months. Her father has to pick her up out of her bed and put her into a wheelchair. Sophie has a feeding tube going up into her nose. Her eyes remain closed at all times. Sophie's body is lifeless and limp, and at 9 years old, she wears a nappy. Sophie has been like this for the past 20 months. The feeding tube, it's necessary to keep her alive. And the wheelchair is the only way to get Sophie out of her bedroom. So, has the 9-year-old Sophie contracted a disease? Has she been diagnosed with a condition which has turned a healthy and happy 9-year-old into who she is now? Well, no. Sophie has no physical condition which is causing her to be in this asleep state. Asleep is what Sophie's family call it. That's their term for what's happening with Sophie. They say she's asleep. But there is an actual term, there is a real term, and that is resignation syndrome. Sophie is suffering from resignation syndrome. Now, in a second, I'll go into exactly what that is, but first, let's have a little overview of Sophie's life, Sophie's family, and how they found themselves in Sweden. Right, so Sophie's family, it's her mum, her dad, her younger sister, and as I said, they're from Russia, so they are a Russian family. Now, due to some business which Sophie's father was caught up in with the local mafia, they have to flee the country. It's difficult to find the information about what that exact business might have been, but being caught up with the mafia, well, it doesn't sound good, does it? I mean, never sounds good. Yeah. Entangling with the mafia, no thanks. So the family of 4, they make several attempts to get out of the country, but each time they try to leave Russia, this gang that the dad is wrapped up in, stop them from ever leaving. It gets sort of heavily hinted at that it's potentially to do with money and that perhaps Sophie's dad owes this gang money. But the situation just, it gets really ugly, and the gang are preventing Sophie's family from leaving. On their third attempt to leave, they are driving, or I don't know, maybe fleeing is a better word, when the car that the family is in is stopped and Sophie's father is dragged out of the driver's seat. Sophie and her brother are in the back of the car, and Sophie's mum sits in the front. Sophie's mum is also dragged out, and she is attacked in the street. She is kicked, she's punched, and she's thrown to the ground. Sophie is inside the car and she is screaming for this attack to stop. The people carrying out this attack, well, they stop with Sophie's mother, but they don't stop with Sophie's dad. Before too long, they've beaten him black and blue, and they've dragged him off, and they've put him in the back of a van. Oh, just imagine being 8 years old and watching that. Just awful. Now, Sophie is hysterical. Absolutely hysterical. So the family, they go to nearby family in their town, and it takes Sophie hours to calm down, to stop crying and asking where her dad is. For 3 days, the family wait. They wait and they wait and they wonder where the dad can be. They have no idea. Is he dead? Nobody knows. What has happened? Nobody has a fucking clue. But on the third day, he walks through the door of the family home, and yes, he is beaten and he's bruised, but he is alive. And he tells his wife and family at that point that they must, right now, no matter how difficult it is, they must get out of Russia. If he is to survive, that's what they have to do. Okay, so what they do is they make another attempt. And this time they are successful. They sneak off in the dead of night. They get out of Russia. They make a long and arduous journey towards Sweden. Politically kind of interesting at this point, because this was 2016. Sweden were seeing a lot of asylum seekers enter the country. And right in the middle of Sweden, there was an area that was sort of sectioned off for refugees, for asylum seekers. And this is where Sophie's family find themselves. Now, the whole story of that I've just told you about how, Sophie ended up in Sweden, that gets us there, but it's not really the interesting part of the story. It's what happens next that fascinates me. And this is what first caught my attention with this story. After a few months in Sweden, the family settle, so they get a home, Sophie's father gets a job, and the kids start going to school. Now, Sophie, at first, she just starts to display some quite odd behaviours. She stops playing with her younger sister. She's not interested in games or in running around. She no longer puts on music and dances. She gradually stops having an appetite. Her food just goes cold on the plate. She sleeps more and more, and she won't wake easily in the morning. She loses interest in everything around her. And eventually, she just stops eating and drinking. Now, at 9, this is very, very worrying for her family. So they assume that there has to be some sort of physical illness. There has to be something at play here that's causing all of this. And of course, they're fucking dreading the fact that they might go to a doctor and, they're going to get a diagnosis of something. But they need an answer. They need to know what's going on. But doctors, they can't find any physical reason why she's acting this way, or anything that can really explain the change in behaviour. So her family start thinking, is she depressed about the move from Russia to Sweden? Is this what's causing her unhappiness? And amongst all of this, with the doctors, she gets referred to a child psychologist who, after examination of Sophie, very clearly says, this is resignation syndrome. So what the hell is that, please? Well, time to put on my doctor's coat, get my medical manual out. I think in the last episode I was all about dressing up like a judge. Now I'm a doctor. Next week, don't know. Who will it be? Police? I'll be police next week. Simply put, by doctors, to Sophie's family, it's explained that Sophie has lost the will to live. She has disconnected her conscious and is now living in a coma-like status. A slightly more, maybe poetic, maybe more understandable way to put it is that doctors describe she is like Snow White. She has simply fallen into a sleep from which she will not wake. She's neither dead nor alive. She's just simply existing. In Sweden, in the early 2000s, there were, get this fact, there were 400 children brought into hospitals with a similar condition to Sophie's. Now, parents were convinced, absolutely convinced, their kids had been drugged, or their kids were ill, or that there was some strange disease going through kids. But no, they were all told it's resignation syndrome. Each of those children had just detached from the world. And now they lived in their own world where they refused to eat, refused to engage with anyone, they wouldn't open their eyes, they had simply vanished into themselves. And here's what really caught my attention with this story. There are two major factors. Resignation syndrome, or if we're to give it its proper Swedish name, Uppgivenheten syndrome. Oh my god, my Swedish is on point. Yes. Swedish listeners, you'll be able to tell me if that was absolute bollocks. I'm pretty sure it was. Get in touch. Get in touch, Swedish listeners, if you've got a minute to let me know if that was absolute bollocks or not. You know, it's in between just being generally fabulous, blonde and gorgeous. I mean the Swedish people. Ooh, hot. Gorgeous people. I've got a friend, right, who went to Sweden about 3 years ago, and he's a good looking guy, right? He's a really, really good looking guy, but he was like, he came by and he was like, Barry, I have never felt so ugly. The Swedish are just so fucking hot. Even your average Swedish person is gorgeous. It's true, they are. Anyway, that's not what anyone came here to hear about. So, where was I? Oh yeah, the two things that I found really fascinating. The first is this: the 400 registered cases of this were all in refugee children. And secondly, this was only happening in Sweden. In no other country were refugee children being diagnosed with resignation syndrome. So, I mean, over in Germany, where there were close to 1 million refugees by the mid 2000s, way more than Sweden, there wasn't even one case of it. So, why Sweden and why refugees? Now, doctors, they are trying their bloody best to figure this out and explain it. The world's actual leading child psychologist is brought into this and says there just isn't a clear answer. I just don't know what this is. Now, if you read about this online, and by the way, there are some incredible articles out there, you will hear people say it's not about being a refugee child, it's to do with trauma. It's to do with trauma experienced at a young age. So, if we take Sophie's case, right? So, seeing her mother attacked. There's a theory that says what happens is when a child watches the person who protects them the most be attacked, they suddenly go, if the person who is supposedly here to protect me can't protect themselves, then there's no hope in the world. I have to go back into myself, because if they can't protect themselves, I can never be safe. So I have to go to a place where the world can't hurt me. So that's fine, right? I get that. I absolutely get that. But then 400 kids admitted to hospital with the same syndrome didn't all watch their parents get attacked. So that's not really an answer. So some people will agree and say, well, yeah, it is partly to do with that. The other side of it is that people will say, actually, it's to do with the lack of stability. It's to do with the fact that when refugee children arrive in a new country, the instability of knowing where they live, is this their home, is it not, will cause this syndrome to happen. But again, we go back to the same thing. Why only in Sweden? And so where that gets, where the finger gets pointed there, is to the Swedish government, who have had, I won't say have, had at that time a maybe not fantastic way of treating refugees. When I say not fantastic, what I mean is I think families were left for a long time uncertain of whether or not they could actually lay down roots in Sweden, or they were going to suddenly be moved the next day, or they were going to be told to get out of Sweden. I mean, that's obviously, refugee crisis around the world. That's obviously country by country. Everyone deals with that differently, and each country has its own laws. But I think there was a period of time where in Sweden, lots of refugees went there seeking safety, seeking refuge, but also it was then very uncertain when they were there whether or not they were going to be able to stay there. Let's leave Sophie, for 1 minute. Let's leave Sophie for 1 minute. We will come back to her. And we're going to look at Georgie. Alright, who is Georgie? Well, he is a young teenage boy in a very similar situation to Sophie. Georgie's family had fled to Russia to find refuge in Sweden. And when his family arrived, they quickly settled and Georgie began school. And for the next few years, Georgie's life was really stable. So he had his mum, he had his dad, and he had an older brother. Georgie was smart and he did exceptionally well at school. By 13, his grasp of Swedish was amazing, and he was the only person in the family who could read, write, and speak Swedish. He played basketball regularly, he had lots of friends at school and in the neighbourhood. And then one day, a letter arrives from the Swedish government to Georgie's family home. And as the only person who can understand Swedish, Georgie says to his family, okay, I will read the letter. The letter from the government tells the family that they are to be sent back to Russia, as there is no evidence that their lives were ever in danger in Russia, and that their time in Sweden is over. So the family react badly to the news, and they begin immediately to make plans to fight this and try and find a way to stay in Sweden. The outgoing, bubbly, athletic and intelligent 13-year-old Georgie goes upstairs to his bedroom. He lays down on his bed and closes his eyes. And so, resignation syndrome begins. He refuses to open his eyes. He won't eat. He will not leave his bed. He won't drink even a sip of water. His family say it was like all life had gone. So the same process here as Sophie's parents, they go through the process. They go, is this something physical? Has he got something underlying that we don't know about? And doctors say, no, he's just one of these hundreds of kids going through this detachment from the world. He's just dissociated from his life. He's gone into himself. They're told that to keep him alive, they need to get a feeding tube and a wheelchair, and that they need to find a way to exercise his muscles so that they don't waste away. Within a week, Georgie loses 13 pounds and he won't even drink a teaspoonful of water. His friends come to the house and they sit by his bed and they talk to him, but no response. His teachers from school, they come, they sit at his bedside and they read textbooks to him. They are absolutely appalled by his condition because they know that Georgie has a very, very, very clever brain and they don't want to see that deteriorate. So months pass and Georgie, he gets no better. He just gets weaker and weaker by the day. The Swedish government are now piling on the pressure for Georgie's family to leave Sweden and to go back to Russia. And Georgie's dad says, look, my son is on a feeding tube. We can't just up and leave. We can't just do that, right? We can't just disappear, right? We have to stay here because he's on a feeding tube. And the government say, okay, well, that's fine, all right. We'll grant you just a little bit more time. But more time doesn't really help Georgie's condition. Doctors advise that they try with Georgie to keep up some sort of routine, some kind of a semblance, I guess, of normality. So first thing in the morning, he's, put in his wheelchair from his bed and he's taken to the breakfast table and food's put down in front of him, doesn't eat it, keeps his eyes closed the whole time. They're told to take him out into the sunshine. They're told, this one's weird, they're told to play loud pop music near him, in in the attempt that, like, oh, he's a teenager, he'll like pop music, so, like, get some pop music on, and see if that kind of rouses him. I mean, Swedish pop music. Guess it must have been like Eurovision type stuff. Or maybe it was like Roxette. Were they Swedish? Roxette. Must have been love, but it's over now. From the moment I touched till the time you ran out. That kind of vibe. That's what Georgie was having to listen to. And so he gets continued to be fed by his tube. Georgie's headmaster from his school, he visits the house and he tries to encourage Georgie in conversation, but nothing. So this is now, and I don't think epidemic is the right word, but it's now a phenomenon. It's now something so strange for Swedish people to be dealing with, because they're like, there's now 400 kids who are all suffering from this same disorder. And doctors who would come to, like, the home of someone like Georgie would just write on a piece of paper, Georgie shows no signs of life. He appears to be asleep. So, of course, this reaches the news, and there are images of kids lying side by side in Swedish hospitals, in coma-like states. Medical professionals are asked to comment, and, well, they can't, because they don't really know what to say. The government are asked to comment, and they can't, because, again, they just don't really know what to say about it. Eventually, the Swedish Minister for Immigration does speak, and he says, what is happening to these children is terrible, and my country must look for better ways to help them. Are these just words? Maybe, maybe not. After heated arguments with the authorities, Georgie's family eventually win the right to stay in Sweden on permanent residency. So the family, Georgie's family, they can continue their life in Sweden as they were. Now, as soon as they get that confirmation, they rush into Georgie's room to tell him. They get no reaction. Georgie doesn't stir from his coma-like state. So, unsure what to do, the family, well, they think, let's just keep repeating the information. Let's keep repeating the information to him, and at some point, he might hear it in some way, he might understand it. 2 days after hearing this news, something in Georgie begins to change. He moves himself in bed for the first time in months. He makes an attempt to roll over onto his side. He very briefly opens his eyes. His dad brings him water on a spoon, and for the first time in months, Georgie drinks it. His feeding tube falls out one day, and rather than rush to replace it, the family wait. They wait to see if he will eat, and he does. Georgie just points to what he wants to eat, and it's ice cream. Such a teenager. Gradually, bit by bit, day by day, slowly, softly, catchy monkey face, or whatever that phrase is, Georgie begins to recover. He begins to speak again. He starts talking, and then he starts to walk. He starts to become the Georgie that he was before resignation syndrome took over his life. Georgie's story is given to the press, and photographs of him moving around and, looking healthy and looking active are in the newspapers. And in the interview that he does, he says, "I can only describe the feeling as being trapped in a glass box in the sea. All I can see are the dangers around me, and I spend every moment praying that water wouldn't enter the glass box." So, I'm glad to say Georgie made a full recovery with no lasting damage after months of being in bed. So his story is a success. But let's go back to Sophie. Sophie still to this day remains in the same condition. Her parents, they've gone through everything that these other parents do. They play music, they try to give Sophie a normal life, but her condition remains the same. Doctors will say, and this is interesting, doctors will say we cannot guarantee Sophie will ever be free of the coma that she is in. We are only doctors, we are not in charge of immigration. That statement is so interesting because doctors are saying, look, if they were safe to stay in the country, perhaps this condition would disappear. Would it? I don't know, but if we believe the theory that it's connected to being a refugee, then I guess so. If we believe the theory that it's connected to the trauma of seeing her mother and father attacked, then when will she ever emerge from it? There's no real answer here except that Sophie's brain has disconnected from the world that she once lived in. So for now, she remains at home with her parents. Now, she attends a centre in Sweden where young people affected by this syndrome can go and visit. I mean, that's how actual bad this syndrome is. That's how bad resignation syndrome was, is that they actually had to build a centre in the middle of Sweden for kids to be sent to, so that they could actually go, let's see if, by giving them music and Coca-Cola and games and whatever, can we draw these kids back to who they were? Can we draw out the 9-year-old, 10-year-old that was fun once? Can we find that again? Many of the hundreds of young people who come through this experience have come through the other side of it and they are fine. But there are still hundreds who remain in the same state. So Georgie might have come through it, and I really hope, that at some point I can come back to you with the same news about Sophie. But for now, so ends the very strange story of resignation syndrome, and so ends the episode. Well, there you go, yeah. Resignation syndrome. Weird. Yeah, very weird. Just, yeah, odd. Didn't know it existed, found that article and went, oh my god, this is so bizarre, why is it affecting so many kids, what the fuck's going on, what's wrong with the world? Yeah. So, if you want to get in touch, you can. You know where to do it. By now you know where to do it. So, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, join the Facebook group. It's wonderful. Oh, if you're leaving iTunes reviews, I thank you. I thank you very, very much. Aussie Forever, thank you for your I'm Addicted review. That was Gorge Arse. Thank you very much. Now, in the name of balance, you know, it can't all be about good reviews. Let's throw in Martin's review. Martin says in his iTunes review, it's a bit of a slight sort of, I don't know, like slight kick in the balls, but also slight handshake all at the same time. I don't know. Martin says, I like Barry's voice, and the storytelling is wonderful, but I can't cope with the jumping about of stories. It's too confusing. Martin, babe. Marty. Martilicious. Marty, my man. The Martinator. Let me say this. You're allowed your opinion, mate. That's fine, right? Marty, babes, say what you want. But what I will say in response to that, okay, because I am allowed a response, is I just don't know an awful lot of podcasts where, you know, you're going to get a story about Japanese love hotels 1 minute, followed by child slavery the next. So I wouldn't really be looking at it as a negative. You know, I think it's alright to hop about from thing to thing. But Marty, my man, it's obviously not for you, but that's fine. So, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it, Marty, baby. Okay, right. Yes, so until the next episode, I am out of here. Once more. Don't know how to really end an episode. But if you have any ideas for how I might do that in the future, please help me. Because I don't know how to end the fucking episode. I just sit here looking at the microphone as if I think some sort of divine inspiration is going to hit me. It's not. I'm just going to say these words. Okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other.
Okay, get ready for some speed. How are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Alrighty, so this episode, well, it doesn't fall under the Survivor series that's been happening recently. This is a change of pace. Let's mix it up. I'll come back to the Survivor series at some point, but for just now, a different kind of story. Weird. Creepy! Creepy as fuck. What the fuck is that? It's Creepsville. Okay, that's it. Bye.
Together. I would imagine from the look on his face. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.